Hey everyone, today's episode of the Films at Home podcast is sponsored by Fright Rags. Fright Rags is an online retailer of horror movie related merchandise. So they've got shirts, they've got sweatshirts, they've got hats, beanies, socks, pins, you name it. If you like horror movies, you need to check out frightrags.com. I love their stuff. I've been a customer for many years, and so I was super excited when they were willing to sponsor the podcast. And I have plenty of their shirts, including the one that I'm wearing right now, which is my Escape from New York shirt. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see that. But I also picked up a new Halloween shirt, a new Jaws shirt, and they have all your favorite movie franchises like The Exorcist, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Basket Case. I mean, you name it, they have shirts for you. So listeners of the Films at Home podcast, you get 10% off your order at frightrags.com by using code FILMSATHOME10. That's all one word, FILMSATHOME10. So check out frightrags.com. That's fright-rags.com. I'll put a link down in the episode description. Go support them. Thank them for supporting the podcast. I love their stuff. I wouldn't vouch for them if I wasn't wearing it right now, and I've been a lifelong customer of theirs. You'll really like the quality. You'll love their unique designs and artwork on their shirts. Guarantee you won't be disappointed. So use code FILMSATHOME10 at frightrags.com to get 10% off your order today. Hey everyone, Jeff here from Films at Home. Thank you for coming back to the podcast today. Now, today's episode, it's going to be a long one because I could have talked to this guy for, I swear, a whole day if time allowed. We're talking to Matt Patterson today. He's a physical media home entertainment industry expert. Matt worked at Warner Archive under the Warner Archive label for 11 years, from 2009 up until 2020. So Matt was one of the main guys behind the scenes at that label. He worked with acquisitions, he worked with marketing, he was a film genius when it came to Warner Brothers and what they did with the Archive label. He also ran the Warner Archive podcast, which has tons of episodes if you want to check that out. And he's currently running his own podcast with one of his other co-workers who used to work at Warner Archive called The Archive Guys. So he is very well versed in home entertainment and physical media. He goes to Comic-Con, he's hosted panels, he's done tons of marketing for different titles, and he's just a really, really smart and talented and unique guy. So I was really excited to talk to him. Matt's actually also a writer, producer. He actually has a film going around right now called Lunamancer, which is going around sci-fi film festivals, which you guys should check out. And he's actually the writer of This Film Is Not Yet Rated, which was a documentary on the MPAA and their film ratings and how that sort of evolved, how that goes on behind the scenes. It was a big hit on like early Netflix, like way back in the day on Netflix. I've actually seen it. I had no idea Matt actually wrote the movie when I saw it, but it's an excellent documentary that you guys should check out. So this was such a great conversation, but I will give you guys a fair warning. It takes a couple left and right turns. You know, we talk about a few different topics. Matt is just such an interesting, entertaining individual that, you know, I just sort of let it go where it went and had a conversation with him. So obviously we talk home entertainment and physical media, but we also talk like collecting mindset and digital collectibles and sort of like, you know, where collecting may be heading in the future. So it turned into a really, really interesting conversation that I think you guys will enjoy. So check out all the links in the description for all the places you can find Matt. But without further ado, let's jump into the interview. So sit back, relax, and I'll talk to you guys at the end. All right, we're back, guys. Matt Patterson, welcome to the podcast, sir. Thank you for taking the time today. Thanks for joining us on the Films at Home podcast. Want to give people a little bit of background on you? What are your credentials? Why are you here? Why did I bring you on?
Hello. I am Matt Patterson, and for the last decade, I guess for 12 years, I worked with Warner Brothers, first in digital distribution and then home entertainment, and I helped start up the Warner Archive boutique label at Warner Brothers and witnessed it kind of firsthand. You know, there weren't that many people who worked there that as long as I did. There were a few people, but it's a very interesting story on how it came to be and how it lasted and continues really to this day, as long as it has in a rapidly changing in many, many ways home entertainment market.
Yeah, so I mean, you want to dive into that? Because I am curious. Like, we're going back to what, 2010 when Warner Archive kicks
I
off?
Yeah, I started in 2009, and
Okay.
my personal origin story, which I actually did not find out all of the details about until 2016 when I had a lunch with the guy who hired me. Interestingly, we were in Scotland. We both happened to be there. He was like, "Oh, hey, come have lunch with me." I'm like, "Yes, that seems very appropriate." And he turned to his wife and he said, "Matt is my favorite hire almost ever, but certainly at Warner Brothers, because one day, right before we launched the WB shop in March of 2009, we hired Matt for one day, and he's been there at that point for almost 10 years." And I said, "One day?" And
So
I
you had no
immediately,
idea.
no, I immediately went home and look, I had the email from when I got the offer, and there was no mention that it was one day. And it didn't say, like, there was nothing about terms. But I was working with an agency, and they said, "How would you like to work with Warner Brothers?" And I said, "Okay." And they're like, "Okay, show up." I was like,
Wow.
"Oh." And they gave me some mostly graphics tasks. And I was like, "Wow, there's a lot of stuff going on." I'm in this little office, and they're like, "Yeah, we're launching a website tomorrow," which was Warner Brothers' first direct-to-consumer website that they'd sold merchandise like fashion stuff and hats and T-shirts before, but
Yep.
they had not sold anything home entertainment, and they were launching it the next day, and so they obviously needed help. And at that point, I didn't have a laptop, so I had gone to Apple the day before and I borrowed a credit card because I couldn't afford it at the time. And I got a credit card and I bought a new laptop, and the people at the Apple store said I had 30 days when I could return it. And I was like, "Okay." And I put the Adobe software package on it, which had a 30-day free trial.
Yep.
And I showed up, and at the end of the day, I said, "Okay, guys, see you tomorrow." And the vice president at the time and this guy who I had lunch with looked at each other and they said, "Sure." And so they just never let me go. And he said at the time that they were impressed with my confidence that I would come in and say, "See you tomorrow." But it was totally from a place of ignorance.
Hey, so you had
And
you may have had the best first day of anybody ever then.
yeah, and I didn't find out for 7 years. Like
I love that. That
that
he just
is,
dropped that on you so casually
yeah,
at one point.
yeah. My mind, it was like that itself was like a movie where all of a sudden it was like zoom in, and then I'm remembering, and I'm like, "Oh." But my second stroke of good fortune was that 3 weeks later they officially launched the on the WB shop. It was part of the WB shop was the Warner Archive label.
Mm-hmm.
And the Warner Archive label was designed at the time. My boss, George Feltenstein, and some other executives who were there in home entertainment for a while. George has told this story many times, and it's fascinating. But even starting with CDs, they were like, there are certain things that they had masters for, even CD time, which stores they didn't feel could sell at retail because books and records and movies, returns were a big problem. If you couldn't project the proper, proper sales, and you got stuck with all these returns that cut way into your profits. So
Sure.
especially when you got into catalog video, no matter what you did, right, the profitability of it was low unless it was, kind of obvious. And so by using a manufactured on demand method, right, there's no inventory until at the time the WB shop that would send an order, and then a disc would be made, a cover would be printed, and it would be shipped to the customer. I thought that was radical, and something that I understood from my previous work. I had authored a book, and I had worked on documentaries. I co-wrote a documentary a few years before called "This Film Is Not Yet Rated," but I was always interested in the business end. I'd always, at that point, I had websites up and running for over 10 years. And this just really hit me personally, like, this is brilliant, right? And on the day that the product launched, there was on the Today Show, Debbie Reynolds came up and she introduced the concept, and it was all the marketing people who were first involved on the publishing end, not on the retail end, which is where I started, focused on a classic movie audience. But my eventual boss, George, had also in the initial order put a lot of cult movies in there. And when it launched, more of the press was about the cult movies than the classics. And I remember the guy who said yes to me after day one, he's looking at, because we could see where people were coming from, right? Tracking back from the website.
Sure.
And he was German, and he goes, "What is this website? Ain't it cool news?" And I was like, it's Ain't It Cool News, and it's promoting Freebie and the Bean, which is a title that people want. And he just kind of looked at me, and then all of a sudden another light went on in my head, and I go, oh, they don't know, right? And so one other guy who happened to be sitting next to me who started the same day, and he eventually became vice president in charge of Warner Archive. And, we got together with George, and we created this whole marketing platform that the studio hadn't done before, which was using digital marketing to talk directly to consumers. And we started, doing sales and promotions. And when our first year sales were about 10 times what was projected, we were able to start funneling the money back into masters and started making new masters, right? Rather than using good existing masters. And then from there, the guy Mike, he had an engineering background. He really took to process reform, and he was the one who was able to, and then with the people who were doing the mastering and the disc authoring, et cetera, the whole team got behind bringing those costs down as low as possible, with maximizing the quality of the image, even for the dopiest releases, and communicating that to the customers that we knew what we were doing in a way, right? I mean, everybody makes mistakes and stuff, but having that back and forth with the customers was very, very important to the growth. And then we moved on to, newer technologies. We started Warner Brothers' first subscription video on demand service, which is like the great grandfather of HBO Max. Right.
Sure.
And, we worked a lot of kinks out of that system. And then we were able to add Blu-rays, and those and it sort of became an assembly on demand instead of manufactured on demand. Like they're on a spindle. Most of the DVDs, not all, but at least to start, a lot of the DVDs are on a spindle, and so then they're pieced together. We changed the cover art to make it original posters, and then we started sponsoring events, and we got more sophisticated newsletters, and we basically became a specialty distributor within the larger distribution. And so, that comes with positive and negatives because we had a lot of resources and we only dealt with material that we owned. Unlike other indie labels, we had, or, like we were closer to the source. That's a better way to say it.
Sure. Yeah.
And that's basically it. But because of those situations and because we were operating under that umbrella, we would try to spend a lot of time on our podcast. I think there are almost, we have I think 11 years of Warner Archive podcasts.
There's a lot.
I was on it starting in 2012 when we kind of changed the format. We basically took the newsletter and put it to podcast form, and it's we tried to be as transparent as we could be and as clear as we could be, because people who are fans of home entertainment, the number one question is, why this? Why now? And why not something else? Like, why can't I see this? Right.
And that is something I'm always curious about too, is why did XYZ get released, but this huge movie that I think would sell very well has only a DVD release? And, there's rights and licensing, but there's also got to be something else to it because, like you said, Warner, you have everything there. So why this versus that?
Well, everything there is yes and no, right? We have elements, and not all elements are in great shape. And there's costs involved, depending on what shape the master is in, how much cleanup we need to do. And especially as time went on with Blu-rays, our target became higher and higher. Like where we didn't have to, because the masters weren't necessarily provided to us, we didn't have as much bonus content on it because our distinguishing factor was we put our time and effort into the movie presentation. If we could port other things, or I occasionally did commentaries, or we would get other producers to make new commentaries, or different special features. Like kind of toward the end, I was doing some more of those. It's like we did it with less and less people because as time went on and the company changed hands or CEOs, our labor force became less and less. It started when Warner Archive started. It had 0 full-time employees dedicated to Warner Archive. And that number would fluctuate, depending on other people's job responsibilities, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure.
So that's also part of it. Like the streaming service was actually kind of also the same way. And that affects, the number of people behind the scenes actually also affects what comes out, how fast it comes out, right? The good news for all consumers now is that the rush to spend money on streaming services and the rush to put in 2K or higher files, especially on movies, there was a preservation effort that was going on when I was there and continues to bring, to scan as much as possible out of the video and film library and make as high quality scan as possible and put it in the vaults, the digital vaults that we have at USC.
Mm-hmm.
So at that time, if a master can be made from those elements, then great. And if that can be cleaned up, it can be made available for Blu-ray and streaming, right? And if the streaming people want a new master because the old one doesn't meet the quality standards of, HBO Max or whatever they're aiming for, that master can then become available for physical media. So it kind of goes both ways. Did I begin to even? It's very complex, and I have barely stopped speaking. But that sort of is a deeper background on where everything comes from. And then, right, here's the simplest. This is my TED Talk. Ready? I'm going to do my TED Talk version with my hands. What do we have available? Do we have the rights to it? Because those change. Right. And what shape is it in? Because the more restoration it needs, the higher the cost. Mm-hmm. And then that, even in the micro, collectible world that DVD has become, rather than as a consumer item that's on a shelf, right? Because those on the shelf discs still exist and they still sell in huge numbers. But when you come to the collector market, you do make a projection of sales. How many people will it sell? Because with a manufactured on demand method, you still have to sell X amount to be profitable, right? It's a small number.
Yeah.
But if you don't hit that number, then, you could have picked something else.
So what were some of the best that you had? And I guess what were some of the big flops that that you thought would be huge, but ended up not hitting?
Like over that amount of time, we ran a spreadsheet, which I like to quote, which is basically like, it was like 92% of everything we released showed some kind of profit, right? Which
pretty good.
Is huge, right? But those numbers are, right, it's not the hits business. But within that business model, you sometimes get a hit. And sometimes it's like, it's going to do well, but you don't know how well. But one of the ones that I like to think of is the first Batman animated movie, Mask of the Phantasm, which to us, right, we were more having conversations with fans. We were going to Comic-Cons. And while that film, if you were in the, call it in the office, right, and you were looking at box office, you'd be like, oh, how could that possibly, do well? It just, all the projections would be weird and it's not in great shape, even though it's from the 90s, but it was made very quickly because it was originally going to be a TV movie. But when you're on the ground with fans, you're like, well, that's like considered the first, DCAU film. And they know
it's historic.
Yeah. And like that, the story, maybe not everybody knows the story behind it, but it's a story that's easily told. And so we put all of our effort into it and spent a lot of time cleaning it up. And, there were things that we had to decide to leave in because they were errors that were originally made by the different studios that were rushed into doing it back in the early 90s. But the response we got was tremendous. We brought the first, 5 or 6 minutes to Comic-Con and got a lot of the original cast and crew and creators out for, we filled like 1,000 or 1,500 person room, and everybody went nuts. And the sales were so good that the larger home entertainment business decided to take what we did, the methods we used, and release the whole series in a box set.
Yep.
So,
and I was going to guess, if I had to guess, that was the one I was going to pick. I have that one. I have the whole box set. I mean, I was born in 92. So that series and that show was childhood. Like that was it. I grew up getting those VHS tapes from the video store. And so I had to have them when they came out. But yeah, I mean, I was one of those who was like, this is a huge release and I'm so happy somebody's doing it. And I would have guessed either that one or The Wrong Man were the two that I was going to guess as big sellers.
Yeah, The Wrong Man is another big seller. The, we got later, certain films just hadn't kind of gotten around to coming out on Blu-ray in time for big box stores, right? And so the bar of what can make it to, a Target, right? I mean, Barnes and Noble has still probably, I think that's the best place to go retail. Like if you're going to walk in a physical store.
Yeah. Nationwide. Sure.
Nationwide.
Yeah.
But that's not, Barnes and Noble isn't going to make or break. I mean, I don't know. Cause that wasn't my business. Right. But the considerations were a little different. And so, something like Hitchcock, or The Thin Man, right? The Thin Man movies were huge, but that was also because it was not, when they were first assessed for Blu-ray, the technology was different and the costs were going to be higher, right? So by the time the Thin Man movies were, the technology could handle it relatively inexpensively, the market for that was kind of gone. And so it went out through MOD, but they look fantastic. And, they did really well. I don't think that surprised anybody, like the Batman surprised people, which I like. And it's a good example of having the two units working correctly, right? Because we didn't, we took a chance on it, but we took a chance on it, right, correctly, and it paid off. And our disc that we did that one in the Sub-Zero one, which was the first. That one went directly to VHS. Those two discs are in the larger set that we produced. So it was cool, right? Because they already had those masters, and then they could put. I mean, those are the exact same disc, and that helped them fill out their larger disc. And I got to play with cool Batman imagery, and I personally designed the ads for it because I'm like, no, this one's mine. I get to do it.
So what year? I forget what year that was. Was that 2017
or 16?
15? It was even earlier.
16 maybe.
Because it's just amazing that in 2016, whenever it was in that time range, you'd have a Comic-Con panel for a Blu-ray release, essentially, right? I mean, I just can't. Would that happen now? I don't know. Maybe if it was huge, maybe Zack Snyder's Justice League. But it's amazing how it's changed so much.
So these aren't Hall H panels. Have you been to Comic-Con? When I
Not
start
the
talking,
big one. No.
So One of the things that I'm very proud of, because our team really pushed for this. We had because even up until 2020, because we did their first online Comic-Con, but we had a great relationship with the people at Comic-Con, because we understood and understand their mission, right? Because their mission is, they're a nonprofit, right? And so they want to talk about and celebrate popular culture. So we would do when I kind of joke, like mini lectures, right? Or podcasts, where we aren't, the sales message is inherently in them, but by talking about the history of the film and, getting talent up there and getting into some different specifics about the initial product, and then even into a home entertainment release in a way that we're kind of talking now, they would allow us, we would sometimes do 4 panels in one Comic-Con, which was 4 hours of clips that I had to pull. It was a lot of work. Where the larger organization, their method, which worked for them, but they had much larger budgets than we did, right? And they would, I loved when they did a Detective Pikachu, the whole installation where you walk through and saw all the different Pokemon and then hug Pikachu at the end. And the people who worked for them, they'd all go down there and man the booth. And, that was how they promoted the home entertainment release of that, which is, that's because it's a consumer item.
Right.
They're not selling you the history of the Pokemon. Right. But ours would be like, hey, let's talk about Batman. Right. Like we would have panels where we would, I think one of our funny ones was, and this was only like a 500 person room, but we just did like Robin 75, and we did all the home video versions of Robin. But Michael Uslan, I think, came to that one, right? So you've got Batman Billionaire and like a whole bunch of creators all talking about sidekicks and like their role. Like that's a fun panel. And then of course every clip that's up there is one of our releases, we zero in on, right? So that's available. So that's the sales channel, right? Because like the only way to get it would be through Warner Brothers, and hopefully if you're a home entertainment collector, through us. And that's just how we would represent, right? And when the fortunate thing for us with the manufactured on demand model is that nothing ever fell out of print. So from a business perspective, we were pushing the newer stuff, but we were making, as time went on, more and more money was being made by the back catalog, right? And so when you have a rich, active back catalog where, when you're calculating per unit prices, it's just as valuable as a new release in terms of profits. And by keeping that in mind, when I come in and promote, because we did one of the, last panels, God, what was the last year we did? We did like V or something. And then you could promote the director's other work, which was like Steel, like the, but that's still like you could see a bump, right?
Yeah. Well, and it's the right audience. I mean, you're talking to the right people who are going to go out and actually buy these things. So
that's exactly,
that's where I'm curious, like, okay, in the future, because now it's not like just Warner Archive that has become the collectible item. It's almost like all of physical media has become a collectible item because everyone's streaming things.
Yeah.
So what I haven't seen is the major players. I guess maybe Paramount has done this with the Paramount Presents line, but I haven't seen anybody else really shift how they cater to, because even your big release, if this is 2022 and it's Detective Pikachu, it's not the same market it was when that came out to buy that on disc. It's smaller. So how do you hit the collector?
Detective. So the best way to do it, and due to the pandemic and shifts, I am available to be hired, and you won't have to pay to hear me talk quite so much. But I wrote like a little paper. I write these dopey little things years ago, talking about how home entertainment, and it's obvious, it isn't anything brilliant, but home entertainment kind of follows in the trail of the recording industry, right? And everything that's happened with digital, there's been an equivalent that happens in video, and it tails, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. And I very clearly articulated that home entertainment was going to become like the LP, right? The album,
right?
Or even not LP, but vinyl, right? And vinyl is a profit center for many small specialty labels, and some owned by the majors or controlled. Like Warner Brothers has a Water Tower, and they would do these releases targeting collectors, and the collectors want the physical thing. They generally have a working record player, but sometimes they don't. A lot of times the code, not every time, but a lot of times there's a code inside the record so that you can also get access to special digital distribution, or it's on Spotify, right? Like there's no need for it, but people come out for the cover art. They come out to support the artist. They come out for the curation, right? And that's not a bad model for home entertainment. And I think I wrote that in like 2014, right? And that's where we are. And I think that's okay, right? And it's what, it's about you and your values. The quality of a Blu-ray is better than what you're going to see on a stream because it's not as compressed. As time goes on, that may be less true, but 4K is different, and the compression algorithms are improving. But that's also kind of not the point, because people don't buy LPs because they're like, oh, this this album completely made on computers sounds so much better, scratchy.
Right. It's not about it's that. A nostalgia thing. It's a collector mindset. It's a curation of a collection. It's multiple things. But I've been saying that for a few years now when people ask me to, because obviously the sales are going down, streaming's coming up, and I was like, I've been saying the same thing. Well, look at digital music, and digital was iTunes, Spotify, dominated, and now this comeback in vinyl came from zero, from nothing. Nobody was buying any vinyl, so we still have $1 billion market where people are buying DVD and Blu-ray, and it hasn't slipped that far that we're at zero. So I think if you model that, you come to a middle point where you level out and you can, keep this business going. I have no fear that it's going to die. People always tell me, "Oh, it's dead. It's dead. It's dead." I'm like, it's far from dead. There are dozens of us.
Well, in my job, when people would go, "Oh, what do you do?" there was a point around 2016 or so where people would look at me and they go, I don't have a player.
Right.
I'd be like, oh, okay. I mean, there's digital distribute, you're not.
It's fine.
That's not you. Warner Archive sales, by the way, and this might be because of the quality of the titles, and but they've always, and continue to go up, right, compared to the larger market. But Warner Archive's sales increase does not cover the decrease, right? It's not.
Yeah.
It doesn't. It's a overall, right?
Yeah.
Business people don't like red arrow down; they like green arrow up. It's very simple. Like if you have ever gone into a room of business people and you can show them charts with green arrow up, yes, right?
Right. It could be anything.
If you show them red arrow down and you're like, but there's so much money to make, they're like, why would I say yes to red arrow down? Why would you and this is just me on the street, talking about, movies and physical media, right? And at a certain point where the average person is like, oh, you're like a shoe salesman selling non-collectible shoes. It's just like there was this weird perception shift. And the average MBA doesn't want to be in that business. They want to be in the cool business. I'm not, and I'm painting broad strokes, but that's, in the room, right? A theoretical room, that's what you find. But, a good example from the music business was around 2016-ish, people who started advocating for aggregating music publishing rights were all of a sudden in demand, and they were previously in the media rights, garbage bin. They were not considered the best salespeople, right? Who is securing Brazilian music, rights for Brazil or Peru, right? But these guys who were buying music rights at those levels, they immediately started making money when YouTube started paying out people who had music rights because they had to. Now, all of a sudden, that literally $500 investment is paying off monthly, right? And so then the big boys come in and then they start scooping that up. And then they start doing the same thing with digital rights, like America's Funniest Home Videos, right? They launched a YouTube channel with old VHS. And at first people are like, that's crazy. But, a cat landing on somebody's crotch and they scream is funny in 1990. Timeless. Yeah, no, it is, right?
Yeah.
And guess what? People would sit and watch it. YouTube would serve them an ad, and then it became one of the most profitable channels. And that was just because a business guy realized that, presented it, and then now that there's America's Funniest Home Video channel that's AVOD, right? You can get it on Samsung TV Plus and some of those other things, and those make money, right?
Yeah.
That's where advertising is where big money is made in catalog. And always kind of has been. But again, Nat, right? I'm getting back to it. So it's like when somebody is putting together a library like that, then there's an opportunity to maybe get something on physical, for a collector. I mean, I don't know if a collector is going to be clamoring for the greatest cat videos of the 90s, but there are other things, like soap operas or whatever. I mean, I'm just making stuff up.
No, absolutely.
High volume.
People want to own those TV shows. I have all the Nickelodeon cartoons from the night. Exactly. I mean, those will sell well regardless. I mean, I'm sure. And people always say this, why do you buy them? They're out in streaming services, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, yeah, but I also want them. on my shelf, and I want to be able to show people. I can't show people a streaming collection. It's part of me. It's my curated collection. It's something that I take very personally and enjoy having in my house. And I'll tell you, even though nobody has a player anymore, and they're all like, you still buy movies, but when they come in this room and they look around, I don't know of anybody who's like, this is stupid. Like, everybody's like, oh, do you have this movie? Can I check this? Do you have this one? And I'm like, yeah, this is why it's so cool to me to do this, because everybody has that feeling of wanting to go back to a Blockbuster at some point.
Yeah.
Like you can't get that feeling from Netflix, HBO Max, no matter what. And that's why, that's part of why I do it. I also like to just have physical copies, because it's, who knows what they're going to edit next on streaming or remove, and you'll never see again. Part of that is also why I keep physical versions of things. I don't like my stuff to be in a cloud. When they decide to shut, Movies Anywhere down in 5 years, and you lose all 1,000 of your movies.
Yep.
Oops. What do you do there?
Those are, and those traditional arguments hold. Just on a personal level, I was scrambling, and I think it's actually in a storage area, but I was scrambling for an old DVD of, speaking of Batman, Legends of the Superheroes, the 1979 Hanna-Barbera Batman that kind of killed Batman for 10 years, in terms of there was no live action Batman. I have a soft spot for it. I also like the Star Wars Holiday Special. But because they are products of their time, and they are entertaining, even if you don't understand them or the context. Those kinds of things in and of themselves, that's a panel at Comic-Con I'd go to, right? Like, please explain this to me. But Legends of Superheroes, we even did a presentation on it at the Paley Center, which I felt was a cultural high point. But my girlfriend found it on Tubi, and she's like, "Oh, I've never seen it." And she puts it on, and I'm like, "Yeah, we can watch this version." And I see it, and I'm like, "This is the wrong master." I'm like, the only one. And she's like, "No, it looks fine." And I'm like, going back in my head, like over 10 years to like the work that we did we took the original 2-inch master, we had it sent to UCLA, where they lovingly, did this like high-res scan. We could have released the master that they had. People would have been fine with it, but this new scan made it look good. And that, that was a reason to upgrade your bootleg VHS, I actually cut like 7 minutes of extras that we had found on Tales, because I just thought it was funny but now I'm like, no, you should see this. And she's like, I don't care. but if I had it, I'd be like, well, you can see their faces in this one. But that's a good example of just it's so, only people who care about that kind of stuff would empathize with that story. Anybody else would think I was being kooky, which I am. But I also have I collect dead media. I'm unusual, but I have, I think, like almost 200 CED discs.
Oh, wow. So really dead media.
Yeah.
Not just laser discs.
Yeah.
CED.
Because they're not laser. They are albums it looks like a cassette, and there's a diamond stylus, and they're 2-sided. But they have their own unique art on them, and they're heavy. I had to buy special shelves because I crushed 2 IKEA shelves with them. But I picked them up at thrift stores for 50 cents. But I buy literally every one I could find, because it just, it's it has an interesting history. There's an old website called CED Magic, which tracks them, that I don't think has been updated in 10 years, but it's still up there. But that's just like, that's an extreme form of physical media signaling, because people go, what the F is that, right? They're like, nice laser
Yeah.
disc. And I'm like, actually, right? You know, like that's,
But it is a talking point either way. And
yeah.
the artwork is incredible. And, they almost become like little art pieces of their own.
Because I started giving them away as like birthday gifts to people, right? Like I like giving dead media to people, like HD DVDs. I'm like, here's a copy of, oh God, what was one? Yeah, this like Trojan or
They're
whatever,
just always like, Matt gives the best gifts.
but it comes with a T-shirt. It's like, oh, a T-shirt that's too small and a disc I can't play. I'm like, yes, I found it in the closet. But
I'll make sure to invite you to my birthday party.
But VHS is something that everybody, like, even people who are Uber collectors do not understand the VHS revival at all. But I know people who do not collect much, like in physical. I mean, they'll have some physical, but they'll be way into VHS. It's inexpensive. It's fun. Just as you're saying, it is literally the Blockbuster experience. And there are still many, many VHS tapes that aren't available, or they're different versions. They have hilarious trailers. I love all the opening logos, because it's a different time, and they still play, right? People are like, oh,
Yeah.
They're dead. I mean, but you're not watching them to watch them at the best they can be. You're watching them through the lens of seeing them in the 2000s or the 90s or whenever, 80s or even 70s. If you get to these magnetic video releases, which I'm super into because those are the first studio releases. They're like 100 iconic VHS releases, right? That's a collectible.
Yeah. No, and I get that, because there is part of me that, my favorite movie is Jaws, and I watched it for the first time on VHS, and I absolutely love my 4K disc and what they've done with it, and it looks outstanding.
Universal does a great
job. But there are times where I'm like, imagine if I could just put this on like a 17-inch CRT with the VCR and just like watch it again, or Halloween is one I love, and it's like, again, love my 4K version, but man, wouldn't it be nice to sit in a dark room with a VCR and watch Halloween on that crappy old tape, and where it's almost scarier because you can't see as much, and there's definitely part of me that feels that way. So I get why people are going back to it. That, and there's probably tens of thousands of VHS tapes that never made it to DVD, and tens of thousands of DVDs that never make it to Blu-ray, and on and on. So I get it, and I think it's good. I think it helps, because you're going to buy that VHS tape for the nostalgia, and I have a feeling that those people will then go out and search for, well, what's the latest release of that? Could I buy, the best version, or buy the Arrow video box set that, is tied into this old VHS horror movie? And it should help all of physical media, because it gets people back interested in collecting.
My favorite way of approaching it, I mean, as a professional, right, is any way to see the movie is fine, right? Because ultimately a movie or a TV show is ultimately about the show. But when you become interested in the context, right, like, and the context around it, sometimes that becomes, like TV on Blu-ray from before 2006 is fascinating, because nobody ever really considered at the time that they were making it that anybody would ever see it. Maybe some, and they did. There are exceptions, like they would have European releases in the 60s and 70s of certain American shows that they would, because they didn't have international television distribution, like they would show The Incredible Hulk or Battlestar Galactica internationally on film, right? And so they made sure that it would work at the aspect ratio. But, like made for TV films, rarely distributed outside of that. But anyway, so now when you're seeing it this way, you're seeing it in a context that nobody ever saw it except maybe the people watching dailies, like it's, so you're watching a document that is well outside of what the intention was, right? Because a lot of people talk about intentionality, like, oh, this is what the director intended. Well, nobody intended that, right? So, but does that make it wrong? No, it's like a variant, right?
Yeah. So I struggle with that with 4K and specifically the HDR, because the director approved it, but he didn't know necessarily that this, no, he obviously didn't know this technology existed when he made this movie. So how can you say, well, that's how I wanted it to look, when that wasn't an option? That's how you want it to look now. Maybe that's how you envisioned it should have looked back then, but and sometimes they go crazy with it. Sometimes it's almost like revisionist color grading on some of these, and it's a totally different movie look and feel. I struggle with that.
Yeah, lots of filmmakers always have personal feelings about their work and like going back and fixing things, if they can. Yeah. But there are very few auteurs that are literally, it's a group, right? It's not a painting. There is no like one version. And it's all light captured in some way. There's no, everything is shadows on the wall in the cave, and those shadows shift from device to device, it's hard to capture that. But, there's spirit of, there's, George Lucas is probably the most famous example of somebody who goes back and changes his mind. But he could, right? But that also makes my CED of Star Wars worth more.
It does, yeah, because you got the original, right? Nothing's altered on that,
right? But it's it's still not. It's not at any resolution. It arguably better than VHS, right? Like it's all shades. But I personally like not only recreating maybe a circumstance that I saw a movie or a TV show, but what others saw, maybe historically, like going to a historic theater, built before I was born, and, going to see a film and then they show shorts before it, right? Or like, somebody, there's a show ahead of it. There are so many ways to present and program this stuff in different contexts, so who's to say that is the way? But it's, different. And if you can collect unique ways, right? Then as a fan, that kind of makes it more fun, and also a way that you can see something you're familiar with or for the X amount of time. But with, home entertainment, generally you're seeing it alone or with family people. Same thing can't be said if you see it with a crowd. It's all these, and every crowd, if you have ever been in the audience of showing the same thing, right? The same piece of video in the same theater, even night to night, depending on who's in the crowd, the audience's reaction is different. It's always different. And, you can kind of, you can't control that, but you can, as a filmmaker, you have to adjust, the best you can for you're trying to stimulate a reaction, but you don't know what. I don't know. It's fun intellectually, but that's where it is. But for a collector, right? Why collect? And generally it's to grasp these things, right? That could be intangible, but make them literal, your collection.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. It is. We're getting really deep, and
I
you're
know.
having me think here.
And by the way, I haven't even gone into the world of digital collectibles yet, because like that is
Yeah.
the most mind-blowing next step, right? And I'm not just
Yeah.
talking about like NFTs, which are a whole other subset, but if you've
Right.
ever played like a video game for a long period of time, when you start, you're like, and there's all kinds of games, but like, oh, why do some people value this skin or this item, which may or may not have any game purpose, right? But it's just decorative. But
Yep.
it means something and signals something to other players, right? Especially if it's a multiplayer game, or if it's not, to you. And as you get invested in the community, now all of a sudden you're like, oh, that red bandana is valuable, right? And now you'd be
Yeah.
willing to pay in-game currency or time to acquire it, to signal to other people you do that. That's collecting, right? That's the same thing, but it's just not. It's an item you're displaying within that context, but it's not. You don't. Do you own it, right? You don't.
Yeah. I mean, they
You
could
do.
shut the game server down, and it's gone.
Sure.
You don't.
And my storage space can burn, taking all my.
It's true. Yeah. No. I mean, yeah, it could go either way, but it is interesting what's happened, because I've seen this happen in. So I not only collect movies, but I collect sports cards, and that was another market, funny, that died completely, and then not completely, but it was pretty dead, and the pandemic brought it. It's huge now. The pandemic brought it back. It's huge. All the stuff that I used to buy is now 3 times as expensive. All the stuff I have is worth 3 times as much, but now they're getting into digital collectibles too. And I assume, well, the movie studios are already doing it. Everyone in entertainment. I got an email from the Boston Celtics yesterday that said they're going to start offering NFTs to bring you to the next generation of fandom. I have no idea what it's going to be, but it isn't a new phenomenon, because you're right. For as long as video games have existed and as long as the internet has existed, there have been online games that people have been spending absurd amounts of money on skins or spaceships or planets they want to own in these big, multiplayer games. I mean, we're talking 6-figure $1 million transactions sometimes, and it is all the same. So I'm curious, how that's going to evolve.
I read an article, I guess it was like 2007 or 6, which fascinated me. At that time, those were like when the first digital currencies were coming out for games, like Linden dollars and World of Warcraft gold, what people kind of focused on writing about. And that actually brought me into those spaces, because I went, like, I'm the idiot who's like, yep, money's a construct. Like, I'm there. And not that I started speculating in, Linden dollars or anything, but I decided as a reporter, I was going to illegally buy World of Warcraft gold. And it was the funniest drug deal of all time, because I had to arrange with this guy, and I had to get them $10. And then our virtual characters met in like the town market. And I'm like, hey, do you have my gold, brother? And he's like, quiet, come over in the corner. We can't be seen. I was just dying. It was the best $10 I ever spent, because it was so funny. But there's a demand for it, right? Like, like that, because people valued that, and it was, people figured out how to bridge the online and offline gap. It was a resource. Somebody literally had to go out there and mine the gold, and then they transferred it. That's Bitcoin, right? It's like this. Somebody has to mine the gold, and then it has a value, and once you could transfer it offline, now it has some kind of real world hook. But that's what like with sports teams, right? How, a baseball card is a thing that's printed, originally given away on like a cigarette packet, right?
Yeah.
But how do you bridge that online and offline experience?
Yeah.
Sports, but maybe like usually you see it first in kid stuff, like, hey, join the Roy Rogers Club or the Burger King Club, like those would be the first sort of steps. But those memberships where you're like, I'm part of this club, and now all of a sudden these companies are kind of tracking you and marketing you.
Yeah.
Right? And this goes back to like the 50s and 60s, or it kind of took off in the 70s where it became automated. But that's I have subscriptions today, and they now come to my watch. I'm like, why am I getting these alerts from, Uber Eats? Oh yeah. It's vibrating on my wrist. How to help? Mm-hmm. But that's that. I mean, but I'm hungry, right? Like that's the bridging that divide. So
yeah,
movies again, like kind of same thing, but we as fans, there already is, there's a digital file right now, or even physical files, because film prints still exist and it's a way, but you have to, it's just sort of like online and offline and consumption. And where do you consume it, right? And what does it mean? And but it's hooked into storytelling of some kind, and that's what makes it different than a baseball card, right, or a football card, because those are representations of a moment or a player's experience, right? Yeah, I mean, it's not a
time period, but, right,
an
era,
like the stats, like they to put that stuff on there. Now, I value it as a token. I say this as somebody who has a lot of, I collected sports cards and comics as a kid. And now I'm like, oh, I should probably pull these out of the storage space and stare at
let me know when you do.
I treated them.
Yeah.
I'm not
that's the thing,
know.
right? Because everybody just put them in their bike wheels, and now, I mean, that's why I like the older stuff. I'm looking, I have them right above me here. I have a whole display of, they're all from 1965. That's my favorite set for baseball cards, and I have a bunch of them displayed
sadly,
here.
I know those.
You know those?
I got into it as a kid. It was like, but what access did I have? Like my, what, it's like kids' older brothers would like, they'd break into their older brothers' collections, and I'd be like, oh, you don't want that Hank Aaron card. Who's he?
Right. I'm looking at Hank right now.
Yeah.
He's up here on the wall.
Good card.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, but I am curious, like, I guess I'm no dummy when it comes to movies, and I know that my physical collection is, it's for me, but I also know that there's a future that I'm going to have to adapt to and play that game probably to continue to get the content I want. That it could change. And I used to be like, streaming sucks and don't stream and you only should buy physical. And like, as I've kind of learned more and I've spent more time in this world, I don't feel that way. I probably never felt that way. I've always had a Netflix subscription and a Hulu subscription. And, I watch stuff on there arguably more than I probably watch physical media from time to time. Like there's TV shows, documentaries, and things that don't exist that I want to watch.
It's easy.
Right. It's convenience. I'm downstairs with an 8-month-old baby, and it's like, well, do I want to run upstairs and try to pick the movie? Or am I going to watch whatever's on Hulu? So yeah, it happens a lot. I'm no dummy. Like I know that's the future, and where things are headed. But I do still think there's always a space for I have vinyl records the same I have Spotify. I mean, I have less vinyl records and listen to less than I do on Spotify, but I have them because I like the artwork and I like having a curated collection. So I think there'll always be a space for this. As big as digital and digital collectibles get, people are always going to want that physical object in their hands, no matter what. It's a human nature thing, I think.
I agree. There's something to the programming, and I guess when I was saying like, there's a funny short circuit that can happen with digital collectibles, but the brain pathway is the same. Like once that link is forged, you're like, oh, wow, this has the same kind of dopamine pathway, or however you want to describe it, right? It's just a different kind of input output. I mean, collectors be collecting, right? Whether it's interesting things they find on the ground, right? Like, you're like, ooh, nice stick, but that's you're curating, right? And that's and then it's a token of some kind, and where that token lives, here, look behind. I mean, this is not. I didn't clean up for this, and it gets worse when you open a closet door. It's not, but that doesn't mean that messy people are collectors or vice versa. It's just how you value your time and resource allocations.
Yeah.
And then I mean, lucky, right? You get to work behind the scenes to see how the sausage is made. And that was my experience. And that was why, as maybe a film fan first, right? Film and TV fan who was learning and had learned how to make the initial product, it was really interesting to see how it would kind of come through and find second, third, fourth life and all the ways that it gets out, and gave me an appreciation of even how distribution history, right? And this gets really in the weeds. Distribution history, rights and clearances, masters, companies buying each other, affects curation, because if it's pulled off the market and no one can see it, nobody knows it's a good movie. Nobody knows it's a good movie if you can't see it, right? But things that may have not been considered good movies, as they would get played, over time, they can find their audience eventually. Some of them, some don't, right? But then now that the home video version starts to accumulate value. Here's one other thing I didn't say, and that because this goes into it, and it's a weird byproduct, and I always forget to mention it when we talk about it on the podcast. The more popular a film was in its initial run, it's kind of also the older it is, the more popular it was, the harder it is to bring it back onto the market, because and depending on who owned it, but the negatives would have been run through the machine over and over to make new, it's like, which is why you're not really supposed to run the negative very often, right? And there's, all kinds of generations, but all the different generations coming from the negative down get used, and then they get scratched up, and then they become harder and harder to use. That was the reason for the Thin Man, right? Thin Man was so popular that the elements weren't in great shape, and the custodians of those films did a good job in keeping them, but it's they didn't have a scanner, right? A digital scanner where it could be scanned once and not touched. They would do like an optical reversal, right? Because you'd have the negative, and then they'd make a positive, and then they'd make a negative from that positive and make prints from that, and then they'd go up, right?
That's interesting. Never thought about it. That I've always been like, this movie was so popular, why didn't they preserve this a little bit better? But that makes total sense. If it's popular, it's going to keep getting run, and every time it gets run, that's one more chance to scratch it or get something on the print. And
it means that you'll probably have all the elements because they probably made a lot of them, right? So they have a higher chance of surviving but the quality of the element, so it's like when we would have releases, there'd be these reports, and my boss would track this with, the people in the vault, but it would be like, here's a reel from, this version at this, level, right, of preservation. And, the best one we found is down here for reel 2, but because this one is garbage and scratched. So you put together the best ones possible. Sometimes sometimes you notice a shift, but most of the time it looks, you can correct for it, but it's, when it gets like, we re-released the Bowery Boys. There's like a huge set of those, and they came on DVD, but some of them were only available in 16 millimeter, right? Because they would be run on television, and there were 16 millimeter distribution prints. So it's like we'd have 35 for a reel, and then it switches to 16, and you can kind of perceive it even on a DVD. But then when it comes time to scan it again, right, for a Blu-ray, now maybe someone will have found that missing element, and then that problem will disappear. It's like, the end of Indiana Jones. It's like that, but with film.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Yep. And just like Indiana Jones, and this isn't. It would even happen with Warner Brothers stuff, but it certainly happens with my own archival film collection, aka the stuff in my garage. You open it up, and Vinegar Syndrome's hit it, and this like you get like I call it death salad. It's like on safety film, people are like, "Oh, it's safe," and it turns out that there's this organism condition, right, and it can spread that pulls the emulsion from the film, and it creates an acetate. And when you open up the can, over time, it can actually, when it oxidizes, it can turn film to dust. Like it can, so they have vinegar vaults because you can, the film is dead, et cetera. There's so much to that, but it can just, there's a possibility of that stuff just dissolving. But it's if you've got a pro lab, they inspect that stuff. They know how to deal with it. You keep it refrigerated. Also, studios have now, like there was a fire at Universal, which was horrible, but you try to have copies at multiple different locations. There's salt mines that we keep stuff in, all around. You got to keep it literally all around the world so that if there's a disaster one place, it doesn't take out all your IP.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And I feel like it is amazing how I feel like every week there's a new reel found somewhere of, we found the missing reel from this, or we found extra footage from this that we didn't know existed. And it's a director's cut or something. It's constantly happening. So it's amazing. That's a good point. The Indiana Jones ending is, yeah. That is how it feels sometimes. Stuff's just packed away and you never know what you're going to find in someone's attic or basement or, it's crazy.
Yeah. And with the news of more people are aware if they find stuff that it might have value, like storage wars, like that kind of mentality is out there. And
sure.
Two, more people are going through their archives to digitize them because back catalog is now worth money, right?
Definitely.
If you can release something old, you don't, and it's certain rights have lapsed. It doesn't, you don't have to pay anybody, right? If you own the rights, so like music, right? If you own the publishing and rights, then it's yours. Thanks.
Yeah.
Universal Music Group.
Well, we've been.
That was a lot, right? Yeah.
An hour 15. I love it.
I don't stop, and it's terrible, but this is a good place, right? Because now this episode is a collectible.
It is. This episode will be available as an NFT immediately.
Good.
Immediately following its YouTube publishing, you can have a screenshot of the YouTube video, which I will make an NFT. Yeah, there you go. That's it right there.
Yeah,
That's
I
the
did
NFT.
it. I did it for you.
But no, I appreciate it. I appreciate the time.
Oh,
This is
God.
a good,
Yeah, it's way too long.
nice long episode, but I'm okay with it.
All right, good.
Hey,
Good.
if we have stuff to talk about, we're going to keep talking. So
No,
I'll
I'm
put all
done
the
now.
links in the description. Everything will be there where you can check Matt out. And, of course, just keep supporting physical media and keep collecting because it's fun. And that's what we do. So, all right. I'll catch you guys on the other side of the interview. Thanks, Matt. So, guys, I hope you enjoyed that interview. Matt is definitely somebody that I will have back on the podcast at some point. He is so interesting. He had so much to say. I mean, some of the stuff he talked about, like just right at the very end there about the film negatives and how actually if a film's more popular, you may have a harder time actually scanning that, to 4K. I'm thinking the total opposite. If it's popular, they must have maintained it well. Well, no, they had to scan it a bunch of times to replicate it for other theaters and make duplicates. So really, really interesting insights, and all his knowledge on physical media and home entertainment was just, he's just an interesting individual. So, he's doing this stuff forever. If you're one of the labels out there who is looking for some help, Matt's freelancing now and working with physical media labels. So, reach out to him. I'll put all the links in the description where you can find him on Twitter. His TikTok account is pretty weird, as he said, but you know what? I give him props. He tried something. He tried something different, and I'm following him now. So if you want to check that out, all those links will be there. So all the links are in the description. And, Matt's he's a collector himself. He's the exact type of person you would want out there behind the scenes at these labels. He's very knowledgeable, great at marketing. He completely understands the collector mindset. So hopefully you guys check out all his links and make sure, you support him. Also make sure you support our sponsor, Fright Rags. Really excited that they came on the channel to sponsor today, this podcast, this video. So huge thanks to Fright Rags. And as always, make sure you're subscribed on YouTube if you're watching the video version of this. Make sure you're following along on Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. And I'll also have all my links to social media accounts where you can find me and the podcast and different things going on in my life down in the description as well. So next week, we're talking to Ralph Potts, who is from AVS Forums. He's been a Blu-ray and DVD and 4K disc reviewer since 2002. So he goes way back in the days of physical media. He's been doing this for 20 years. So we're going to talk to him about, his home theater experiences, reviewing movies, sort of the evolution of physical media, how he curates his collection, all that great stuff that you expect from this podcast. So stay tuned for that one. Make sure you don't miss next week. You're following along, subscribed. But yeah, I appreciate all the support. So make sure you're following along. Have a great rest of your day. Stay safe, stay healthy out there, and I'll talk to you all soon.
Coming soon. Be sure to subscribe to the Films at Home podcast using your favorite app so you don't miss another episode. And while you're there, don't forget to rate and review this podcast, which helps us out tremendously. You can also help support us by watching our short form content over on YouTube and TikTok by searching Films at Home. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at films_at_home. The intro and outro were created by Elin Osborne. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.